right, welcome everybody back here to Black Media Matters Studios. And in the studio today, this I think is for our last interview now as mayor of the city of Seattle, Jenny Durkan. How are you?
I'm great, Omari. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be in the studio.
Yeah, what do you think?
It's amazing.
Yeah, we've been working at it. I know we don't have a lot of time today, and there's so many different things to probably be able to cover and everything else. But I thought that maybe we could start, though, by you giving our city a snapshot of like where we are around COVID.
So, Omari, first, the good news is our city's done everything we've asked them to do. And we were the first in. We had no handbook. We had a federal government that wasn't helping and sometimes working against us. And we went through really, really hard times. But today, the city of Seattle, because of our work around testing and vaccinations, we have the lowest incident of COVID, hospitalization, and mortality rate of any city in America. But at the same time, with Omicron coming, we know that there's going to probably be another big wave. And so I would just urge everybody, continue, take those. If you haven't been vaccinated, please get vaccinated. Get boosted. And if you're indoors, make sure you're wearing a mask. Those are the things you can do first to help.
Yeah, I got a lot of family down in Houston, and man, there's people in the hospital. It's a lot of stuff happening in other cities that it just isn't happening in Seattle, and a lot of that is because I tell people all the time, I'm like, Seattle's just kind of one of them cities that just listened, and it ain't like we a soft city either. Seattle is full of rebels for sure, and we're full of people that are taken to the streets. I'm sure you know that, and so, but the fact is that around this issue, the messengers were so aligned and trusted that irregardless of spectrum or view or whatever, people are like, nah, this makes sense. We need to keep the mask on.
I think that's right. And I think the other thing is our city was different because we, as a city government, did things we'd never done before, turning our fire department into a testing department. And first responders, but then setting up a system where our free citywide sites, 1.2 million free tests, 60% of Seattle residents. Our vaccination programs, again, it was the city that was stepping up these vaccinations. We didn't have access to vaccine. We worked with public health, we built Lumen Field, but we worked with community-based organizations so that we had probably the highest percentage of vaccination for communities of color of any city efforts because we really knew that was important.
Yeah, and I mean, I would take this opportunity as well, tell people that it's not over with, I mean, we're still, it's difficult. It's difficult on everybody, but it's difficult, but it's not over with yet.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, It's been the hardest 2 years. It is. People lost their jobs. They lost family members. We had to close businesses down. And everyone became isolated. I think we still are going to have lasting mental health issues related to it. And everyone just to know when is it going to be done and to know that we're going to have this next wave. But I think springish we'll start to get to the new normal. I think incoming Mayor Bruce Harrell is going to have to continue a lot of these efforts. But I also think that then we get to start defining how does Seattle really reopen and how do we come back better?
Right, and I want to talk to you about that. And so you have an incoming mayor here, and yes, COVID is its own kind of thing, but specifically when we talk about in the Black community and where we're at, what maybe your office, because us as a community, we don't have all the math and numbers and things like that. It's hard to hold the next person accountable. And I tell people all the time that it's like, just because you Black and from the CD, went to Garfield, all that, it still don't get no pass. You know what I'm saying? I say all that to say, where does Mayor-elect Harrell need to pick up the baton and not only meet whatever efforts you have made, and maybe you can tell us about that, but to exceed those efforts? I know some things are well known. There's 100 million. And, we've seen that go and be put back in now, second year, the budgets and everything else. So what are some of the things that you've done for our community that maybe people know about or maybe people don't know about so we can make sure this next administration furthers on top of those efforts?
That's a great question. And I think that, we've talked about before how important education is if you're really going to get at the root causes of opportunity. So I'd start with that. Our free pre-K has been amazing, but we've had to really work to continue the size of that program through the pandemic. And then 2 years free college for every Seattle Public School student. Building on that, I was able to announce 2 days ago that Amazon now is giving a contribution. We went to the state, got state law changed, so our community colleges can give a 4-year degree in computer sciences. You can't hire enough people with that degree right now in Seattle. Starting wages are like $130,000 a year. So you can get these students 2 years free college. We now do bridge financing so they get the 4-year degree, if that's what they want to do. And the next mayor, though, is really going to have to push and collaborate to not just keep Seattle Promise as the 2 years, but how do you give people the support for childcare or transportation? How do you open up the doors so they get real jobs and internships? So that's one thing that I was able to do, and we set a lot of that up pre-pandemic. But we've got to, today, you know, when I came in, I'm so proud of Seattle for this. There's about 100 students in the Seattle Promise program, 1,000 enrolled this fall. We've had like 2,300 since I've been mayor, and 60+% are students of color, predominantly African American, and 30% first in their family to go to college. That's ground shifting, but it won't just perpetuate itself. You've got to keep and build those relationships. You've got to make sure that the businesses hire and give those people the opportunity. You've got to work with the colleges to open up. So number one, we've made a lot of advances there. Housing. You know, I'm really, again, in 4 years, $2.5 billion of affordable housing, over 7,000 new units. And then I issued an executive order that I hope he continues that gives people from the community first shot at the housing to be an anti-gentrification and displacement. So things like that, I think that Bruce has a lot of opportunity, but he's also got a lot of challenges, and people got to support him.
What are the challenges?
So you look right now, and you know, first the pandemic's not done, so he's got to be able to continue. How do we get everyone boosted? How do we work with public health? Our economy has changed forever. Getting our downtown restarted is hard because people don't work in the office anymore, and if people aren't in the office, then your small businesses don't thrive. You've got homelessness in a new regional authority, and then you've got the bigger kind of issue of how do we as a city get past divisions. And how does he able to work with the city council and get their support? And how does he make sure that we start focusing in Seattle on our common ground and move forward on our common ground?
Yeah, well, I would say this. Being the mayor in any city is the hot seat, the one in the back, Chief. Being the mayor in any city is a hot seat, but especially the city of Seattle, we don't have enough time with you to talk about this last election and ramifications and stuff like that. I really wanted to keep the conversation centered specifically on our community, some of the big issues there and where they're at. But one of those is gun violence and what the city's doing. Before we get to that, though, ma'am, I did, having you here, knowing this your last interview before you leave office, fortunately, I can say that the first interviews I did with you was actually around housing. The first, it was Ethiopian Community Center, when Africatown Plaza got this funding, and also Gen Pride. They got their funding that day as well. And you promised everybody that you weren't going to retire to the Gen Pride housing. But most people know us.
And I might be a resident there.
most people know us in our interviews here, you know, clearly around the Seattle protests. And we don't have enough time to go in there. And actually, man, it's bad for my mental health, to be honest with you, ma'am. But, I mean, I have to sit here and I have to say that, like, me, Jake Grabrot, thousands of other people in the city of Seattle, you know, we still impacted. We still affected, you know, at times, still bitter, resentful. You know, it's an open wound for a lot of people here. And, you know, there's protesters, there's the media, there was also just residents on Capitol Hill. I mean, it's a lot of people that's impacted. And like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it and change the mood in here and everything else. But, ma'am, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to the people who are impacted. A lot of people impacted by police violence and other things here in the city, but around the Seattle protests. What do you have to say?
So I think, Omari, you're exactly right. So many people were impacted. And it crossed the spectrum. You saw businesses, residents, protesters. You saw the black community come forward, and not just speaking about the murder of George Floyd, but speaking about generations locked out of opportunity and all the systems built against them. And I think you have to recognize it. You have to recognize these impacts are lasting. You have to really meet people where they are. But the number one thing people want is, what are you doing to change it? Because it's got to be for a reason. And so I really focused in 2020 and this year on what did we hear and how do we make meaningful generational change and build it into the systems, because the wounds are even deeper if nothing changes. And so really looking at how do you make those investments in the Black community, but let the community tell you where those need to be and listen and do it over a period of years that it's actually meaningful. It doesn't just pass with the next election, or it wasn't just a bumper sticker. So the wounds are deep, but I really think the long-term healing only comes if people see the changes they're demanding.
Well, I mean, I hear you. I just, it's just crazy. I did a thing last night. It was with the lawyers and judges. I was on a panelist there, and when you're on these panels and people ask you about it, it isn't until you relive these things and and everything. It was there, and I mean it was something. I don't know what all the right answers are. I know, like I said, as somebody who was impacted, this company impacted, we live with a lot of these injuries, physical and mental, that, man, for us, making sure at Converge, making sure to hold everybody accountable. And, you still in office, but when you in the office, I mean, man, how many emails I send, I see no, you guys said they were doing this, what's up with this or that, and the council, and now, a lot of these resources are in community, and we be hitting up the community too, like, hey, man, this money's on the street, you know what I'm saying? What are we gonna do? I think that's the only thing we can do over here is hold people accountable to what they said they were gonna do, because we have a voice, and a lot of our voice represents those tens of thousands of people at times who are on the street just wanting to be heard.
Yeah, and Omari, I think that's a really good point, and I would say that that's going to be a challenge for Bruce coming in, for the mayor-elect Harrell, is there was a lot of talk. And I think that accountability, you look at I had made the commitment for $100 million to be invested in the community. And council had a different way they wanted to appropriate that. We made sure that the Equitable Development Initiative money got spent and into the community. My task force met and came up and worked really hard to come with theirs, and we put that into the community. Participatory budgeting got shelved because council couldn't find a way to make it work. And I, in my budget, put this year's money and next year's money for participatory budgeting. Council decided to reallocate that. And so while I had $200 million over 2 years, it's about 150. But that process still has to go forward. We can't let it be shelved another year. And so I think those kinds of things to really continue to engage people is going to be critical, because pretty soon there will be people who forget what happened and why it happened. And if you want to make that long-term change, you've got to demand that people are accountable.
We ain't going to let nobody forget. I mean, I promise you that. And I think the majority of these amazing people in the Emerald City, they don't want people to forget, and they want our city to deliver upon the promise that's there. I often say at times, but I love Seattle, but oftentimes what people say about Seattle is what Seattle aspires to be, and not quite what it is. Oh, Seattle's a super liberal city. In Seattle, everybody is this and that. Man, we aspire for that. We're not there yet, but we got to keep pushing forward. I say this, I know I've only got about 8 minutes left, and I really wanted to talk to something that's been near and dear to us for years now on Converge, and this is this issue of gun violence here in our city. And really, I wanted to go a different approach with you today, ma'am, because I usually start talking about, okay, well, what's the city doing for this, and I'm policing for that. One thing that we never really bring up that I want to take a moment to uplift as well is a lot of these mamas that's out there, a lot of these families, a lot of these people that are impacted. Maybe we could start our conversation with you speaking to them.
Omari, I think that's, you're exactly right. And through this, that's the voice that gets lost often. And I think, this because of where you come from, but mothers in particular, they're the first violence interrupters from a time a kid is small. And we have created this bifurcated system, I think, in society, and even Seattle, when we addressed alternatives. We left the voices of the families and victims out. And I admit to being mayor not doing enough soon enough, but we've really worked in the last month or two to make sure that we actually get that voice again in the system in a way that addresses it. So trying to help the parents of murdered children so that they can come together and address any range of challenges. When the worst thing in the world happens to your family, you can't be alone, and that's where many of these families are. And we, whether it's how the police respond or how the hospital responds or whether people even can see their child. And so we're really going to break down those silos and see if we can work city, county, hospitals, and listen to the impacted families to say, give us the guidebook and we'll give you the resources. And so I think that's one thing we have to do. But that's a program for when the violence has already happened. We got to get behind that and upstream to really be interrupting that violence in a meaningful way. And I've said it before, it sounds corny, but it starts with good prenatal birth care so the mothers are healthy and have access to opportunity, so the family's whole and has access. It's good schools, affordable housing, parks. It's what makes a city and a community safe. And it's what we haven't invested in, and we've got to be really honest about that. And if we're going to change that, we have to get at that root cause.
Yeah, it's here at Converge, it's crazy because so many of these victims we either know directly or we know indirectly, grew up with their family, and so it be heavy over here. And sometimes it's like we have to slow down because it's impacting, our psyche. But, we also know that a lot of times we're one of the only consistent voices in the city for people who are impacted, especially impacted by gun violence and everything else. And I know I asked you this question before, and I don't know if there's ever a right answer to it, but I'll ask you again. What you just talked about was investment, right? Like, let's get investment going, which clearly we could all agree. How do we get people to care more? And I asked Councilmember Juarez the same thing yesterday. She told me Seattle was the #1 city in America for missing and murdered indigenous women and girls. How do we get people to care more and to see the humanity and dignity in people who might not look like them?
We have to do that at every level. I don't have the wand to say how we do it, but we also know that when the systems are built in a way that gets in the way, then that affects everything. Take the schools. Our teachers work really hard. We went through almost a year and a half where students weren't in schools, families were left alone. But our schools also haven't been built for our black and brown kids. So we have to retool that. Because that's where people spend so much of their time. We have some great successes. Technology Access Foundation, I know you know Trista Zico, but they're back in the Seattle Public Schools. They've got the secret sauce to get STEM degrees. But the caring part, it's that fundamental respect for our common humanity. I'm not sure it's something government can create. It's what we all have to commit to, and it's about what we teach our kids.
I think it's what we as a community and a city and society, what we're willing to say is not okay. Just 200 feet from here is where my mom was attacked. Mm-hmm. Just on her way over here to the studio. And, my mom's pushback on that, she could have went a lot of different ways. And she has a lot of sway. And to see my mama's pushback on that was, one, she wasn't going to sit there and be no victim. Two, I don't know if you saw it, but she came back and walked the street. Three, she's like, you know what? We as a city, we collectively need to be like, man, this ain't okay. It's not all government's job. It's our government, it's teachers, it's parents, it's clergy, it's everybody else. That's the only way that we'll make it to be a better city. I know you got about a minute and a half here left, but I wanted to say this to you, Mayor Durkan, is that over the last year and a half, for sure, there's a lot of things, man, that like me and you, we just don't agree on. I don't think we ever gonna agree on, you know what I'm saying? And that's just it's for another place and time, you know? But I will say this, and I want to acknowledge that you never ran. And when you knew they're sitting over here heated, ready to go off, because Omari will be hearing half of it on the phone, and I'll be like, man, we need to talk to the mayor. You never hid. You never ran. And also when it came with the CD Panthers, the shooting up there, and Coach Elmore said, my kids won't come to practice. The parents won't let them come. And I called your office. I said, man, what do you have to say to the parents of the Central District? I don't know. This Anthony rearranged everything so you can make it on it. So I would say this, Mayor Durkan, and hopefully this is a relationship with the mayor's office that Converge can have moving forward, is that whether I agreed with you or disagreed with you vehemently, you always kept an open line of communication, and in doing so, kept communication open to our community.
You know, Omari, you'll have my word on that. And I think, actually, we agree on more than people realize, because I think, and that's what we've got to focus on, is we're how we disagree and what we disagree on has almost become the emblem that people look for. And instead of focusing on what are those common things we do agree on and how do we move the needle on those. And just on your last question is, we have to find a way as a city to be kinder. People have a right to be angry. They have a right to have demands. People have trauma. They've been mistreated. There's a lot going wrong. There's disparities. There's inequality in the city. But if we don't find a way to also communicate kindness to people, you know, I don't think we can do it as a city. And so my hope is that we can continue to have conversations like you and I have had, but we can have those in rooms across the city. I think the pandemic made it harder because people literally couldn't get in a room together, right? And so everything was virtual, or Twitter, which is just, you know, the meanest forum ever. And so we have to find a way that people can actually focus on what are those common aspirations and how do we get there. And it's okay for us to disagree. It's okay. I can't think of a person in my life that I agree with them on everything. The people closest to me for my whole life, I have strong disagreements with. That's a human nature. But what is that common humanity that ties us together, that if we really believe in it, that we're going to make the commitments that sometimes make us uncomfortable and makes us do things that are hard.
All right. Mayor Durkan, you know, people always like coming in the studio because I get everybody out on time. So
there you go.
Appreciate you taking time, stopping by the studio here, man, and thank you. And we'll continue the conversation. I hope you'll make yourself available
of course.
Afterwards so we can be
I got to be a backbencher.
Exactly.
That's right.
All right, everybody. Until next time.